Have you ever heard a comet sing? This just may be the soundtrack of a comet's lullaby. Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson. In 1996, some were saying that the world had not witnessed such a celestial event for almost 400 years, because at that time, a comet had come to call. We know the orbits of some of these comets. Halley's Comet is one in particular. But there is one that may be much older. In fact, it's about 4 billion years old, and it is nothing short of spectacular. How do I know? Because the European Space Agency had the audacity to land a probe on it as it rushes through the solar system at about 60,000 kilometers per hour, taking it closer and ever closer to the sun. We'll ride its tail for a while with the heartbeat of the internet. The comet is called 67P, and it's moving through space at a leisurely 60,000 kilometers per hour. It has taken the Rosetta spacecraft 10 years to catch up to it. It is 310 million miles from Earth, give or take, as it continues its seemingly endless journey. It was a bold and an almost impossible venture when it was conceived in the mid-1980s. No one had ever attempted anything on this scale. These are just some of the hurdles they had to overcome. The scientists had to pick out a comet and design a spacecraft to carry a lander to it. Now, they had no idea what the surface of the comet was like, and even if it had a place for the lander to set down. What was the surface like? Was it even possible to stay on the surface, or would the lander sink into the massive, icy snowball? Was it even a dirty snowball, or made of something else entirely? A little bit of that knowledge only became available to scientists as the spacecraft parked alongside of it in August. What they discovered was a very alien landscape with little or no gravity. It's been said that the landing was like being on a bus traveling at 41,000 miles per hour and jumping onto another traveling at the same speed. And because of the fact that there is very little or no gravity, the landing craft weighs about the same as a feather. The surface is not what they had expected. It's extremely dry. The small lander touched down, not once, but 3 times, and is resting in the shadow of a cliff. Now that is causing a problem where power is concerned. The small robot needs solar energy to perform its duties. It has, though, returned a mountain of data, but has now been put into hibernation to conserve what little energy is left. One of the most amazing things they have discovered is the fact that the comet appears to be singing. With the lander in a powered-down mode, hoping eventually for sunlight to recharge its batteries, the comet, in essence, may be singing its visitor to sleep. In March 1997, we were looking skyward at a comet named Hale-Bopp. It was so bright that it was even visible in twilight. The ancients would worry if a visitor like this would suddenly appear in their night skies. Seneca, in Natural Questions, Book 7, Comets, wrote, "If a rare comet and one of unusual shape appears, everyone wants to know what it is, and ignoring the other celestial phenomena, asks about the newcomer, uncertain whether he ought to admire or fear it, for there is no lack of people who create terror and predict dire meanings. He also wrote, "How many other bodies besides these comets move in secret, never rising before the eyes of men? For God has not made all things for man." Those quotes appeared in a wonderful book by the authors of the original Cosmos TV series, Carl Sagan and his wife, another renowned author and TV producer, Anne Druyan. The book is simply called Comet. Today we marvel at the appearance of a stranger like this, but in mankind's distant past, when we knew little or nothing about how the heavens worked, they were feared. As the Sagans wrote, and again I quote, "Everywhere on Earth, with only a few exceptions, comets were harbingers of unwanted change, ill fortune, evil." End quote. While we had no bad luck fall upon the countries of the world, no pestilence or mass hysteria with the last few comets that have passed by. Today, in this technological world, we wonder at the romance of it all. In 1996, we thought we were fortunate to see a relatively new comet, Hyakutake, named for its Japanese discoverer, as it passed by our Earth at a distance of 15 million kilometers. Hale-Bopp, though, was first tracked in July 1995, but we were rewarded with an event that was even more spectacular than Halley. It passed by at 198 million kilometers. But as it said in an article in the March 13th, 1996 issue of the Globe and Mail, an article by Stephen Strauss, at the time, they believed it may have been the brightest since the Great Comet of 1811. He went on to quote a 43-year-old astronomer from Halifax, Mary Lou Whitehorn, as saying, "If Hale-Bopp had passed as close as Hyakutake, it would have been absolutely frightening." Not all of the ancients looked upon these heavenly bodies with fear and apprehension. Some may have actually seen something beautiful in the swirling tail that flows out behind a comet. Hyginus, who lived circa 35 BC, wrote this, "But after the conquest of Troy and the annihilation of its descendants, overwhelmed by pain, she separated from her sisters and settled in the circle named Arctic. And over long periods, she would be seen lamenting, her hair streaming. That brought her the name Comet." If you're still not sure exactly what a comet is, again we go to authors Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan for the answers. It looks very much as though comets really are giant ice balls racing around the sun. How much ice is that? Imagine that you had snowplows stationed all over the Earth whose function it is to sweep up every flake of snow that falls in a year. And then imagine that all this snow is somehow packed into a rough sphere, carried out into space, and put into cold storage. You would then have something like a cometary nucleus 10 kilometers across. End quote. scientific community has shown pretty clear evidence that it was a comet that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. In our enlightened age, we know really what comets are, but back in the 11th century, they were still a mystery. Al-Biruni wrote, "Comets are such beings as have been, on account of their merits, raised to heaven, whose period of dwelling in heaven has elapsed, and who are then redescending to earth." End quote. And when they do, they bring with it something akin to hell. The effect of a disaster of this magnitude would be a cloud of debris in the atmosphere dense enough to block most of the life-giving rays of the sun. A period of cold and dark would descend over the planet like a funeral pall. Food wouldn't grow. Winter would be the predominant season. The Sagans believed that it would be like the effects described for a nuclear winter. No wonder the dinosaurs, as well as other species, disappeared about 65 million years ago. And yet, were bombarded on a regular basis by cometary fragments. The Perseid meteor shower in early August, the Leonids in early November are examples of this. Again, I quote, "Meteor showers are the ghosts of comets past and passing." End quote. Now, they may not be as spectacular as the appearance of their host comet on a starry night, but there's something you can count on seeing once or twice a year, and not once or twice a century. The show they provide to romantics on a hilltop, or as they walk through the park on a warm summer's night, provides the perfect backdrop for romance. Heather Smith was one of the translators of a poem by Wan Chu. It was also included in the book Comet, and I quote, "Autumn orchids, luxurious jungle spread life below the hall. Green leaves, white blossoms, a rich and fragrant scent overtakes you. From every person comes lovely children. Why then, my lord, such bitter sorrow? Autumn orchids, fresh and lush green leaves, purple stem. The hall is filled with lovely people. Suddenly, alone with me, a meaningful glance. He came without a word, went without saying goodbye, riding the whirlwind, carrying the cloud banner. Grief beyond grief are life's separations. Joy beyond joy are new friends. Lotus garments, sweet basil belt suddenly came, hurriedly left. His evening lodgings, the god's frontier. You wait for whom at the cloud's edge? With your lady, bathe in the pool of union. Dry her hair under the sun. I search the sky for my lovely one. Why is he not yet here? Face to the wind, indistinct, I lift you my voice in song. Peacock feather canopy, kingfisher blue flag, climb up to the ninth heaven, soothe the comet. Grasping his long sword, he protects and nurtures the young. My lord alone is fit to bring justice to mankind. End quote. In the book, the authors said, in this poem, the comet is both a metaphor for the lost lover and a link to the wise and compassionate God. End quote. It is probably one of the most beautiful poems ever written about the wandering strangers in our night sky. Lost lovers searching for one another in the night sky. Perry Como had the #1 song in 1958. In it, he sang, "Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket. Save it for a rainy day." A nice romantic notion, the kind of thing that makes for a good line in a song, but not very realistic. If you ever did pick up a piece of falling star stuff that had made it through the atmosphere relatively intact, you might find it too heavy to carry around in your pocket. It could also burn a hole right through that pocket if it had just recently arrived. From the book Bet You Didn't Know, an illustrated compendium of fascinating facts and notable quotes by Bruce Lovett, and I quote, "Fallen meteorites increase the Earth's weight by an estimated 12 tons each day," end quote. And yet Lovett also tells us, and again I quote, "The 37 million mile tail of Halley's Comet weighs as much as a puff of cigarette smoke," end quote. It wasn't that long ago that scientists believed that if the Earth passed through the tail of a comet, we could be gassed. Close encounter with Halley's Comet in May 1910 is a case in point. From the February 14th, 1997 issue of the Globe and Mail's Social Studies column, compiled by Michael Kesterton from their files, documents some strange beliefs about comets that lasted through into this century. And I quote, "On May 27th, the crew of the gas-based steamer Mini Maud reported they had been gassed at sea by Halley's Comet on the night of the 19th. There had been a stifling smell of sulfur, and the sailors, alarmed and feeling bilious, covered their faces with handkerchiefs. An hour later, a cool wind swept the gases away. The sailors knew then they had passed through the tail of a comet and were safe," end quote. But if you can't afford an ocean cruise, a romantic walk through the park or down a crowded avenue under the stars is enough to inspire the romantic in any soul. But what are the odds that your romantic night could be ruined by getting hit by one of these falling objects? The chances of you actually being hit while out for a stroll are minimal, but it could happen. We've all heard the stories of people sitting in their homes and having these meteorites crash through their roofs. We've witnessed things in the sky that others before us have never seen. The 2 comets in the 1990s are proof of that. One just recently that passed Mars, and now the photos of the comet landing. And yet many of us still don't bother to look up. Carl Sagan once said, "The lifetime of a human being is measured by decades. The lifetime of the sun is 100 million times longer. Compared to a star, we are like mayflies, ephemeral creatures who live out their lives in the course of a single day." End quote. Take a few moments of that day to look up and wonder at the magnificence of the universe. You know, I'm always reminded of another quote from the Good Life Almanac. "Butterflies count not months, but moments, and yet have time enough." Lewis Thomas in The Lives of a Cell, Notes of a Biology Watcher, wrote, "Statistically, the probability of any one of us being here is so small that you'd think the mere fact of existing would keep us all in a contented dazzlement of surprise." End quote. And this excerpt from Chicken Soup for the Couple's Soul, published in 1999. In it, Barbara DeAngelis wrote a piece called "What Does It Mean to Be a Lover?" And I quote, "You are a lover when you remember that your partner does not belong to you. He or she is on loan from the universe." And Robert James Waller, writing in the Bridges of Madison County, he wrote, speaking of one particular love affair, and I quote, "In a universe of ambiguity, this kind of certainty only comes once and never again, no matter how many lifetimes you live." Andrew Wyeth, in an interview in 1965 for Life magazine, said, and I quote, "I prefer winter and fall, when you can feel the bone structure in the landscape and the loneliness of it, the dead feeling of winter. Something waits beneath it. The whole story doesn't show." End quote. We could take that thought and apply it to the intense cold of deep space and the loneliness of an alien landscape like that of a comet, or maybe the loneliness of a spacecraft flying alongside that comet, or a lander sitting on its surface. We are curious as to its makeup, and know that beneath its crust of dirty ice there lies more of the story of our origins. Eventually, that story will be revealed in all its glory. But for now, you've taken a baby step to unlocking the mystery. Ralph Hodgson, now with the perfect ending to A Night Under the Stars. "I stood upon that silent hill and stared into the sky until my eyes were blind with stars, and still I stared into the sky." Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jatson.